Given my occupation and what my normal schedule looks like, it is actually quite out of the ordinary for me to have gone out so many times during such a short period. I suppose I was going out more because this was the time just before the Lunar New Year, when people hold a lot of parties and host get-togethers to celebrate. Once I put everything together, it was really hard for me to say definitively whether or not I might have been infected during that period. The only thing I could do was work backward to try to rule out an infection by counting down, day by day, until I had passed that 2-week period. During that time, I was feeling quite depressed. My daughter returned from Japan on January 22nd, the night before the quarantine was announced. I went to pick her up at the airport that night at 10 p.m. By that time, there were hardly any cars or pedestrians on the streets. When I got to the airport, almost everyone standing outside waiting to be picked up was wearing a face mask. There was a heavy feeling in the air, and everyone seemed extremely stressed out. There were no signs of the hubbub, chatter, and laughter that you normally see there. Those few days were when panic and fright were at their very height in Wuhan. Just before going out, I left an online message for a friend of mine, telling her I was reminded of a line from that old poem, "The wind whistles by as a chill descends on Yi Shui." Since her plane was delayed, my daughter didn't come out of the terminal until after 11 p.m. My ex-husband had dinner with my daughter the previous week. Then, just a few days before I picked her up, he called to tell me that something was wrong with his lungs. My guard immediately went up. If he was infected with the novel coronavirus, then there was a possibility that my daughter might also be infected. I told my daughter, and we decided that she had better self-quarantine at her apartment for at least 1 week before going out. That meant that we wouldn't spend the Lunar New Year together. I told her I would bring her some things to eat. Since she had been on vacation abroad, she didn't have any fresh groceries in her apartment. We both wore face masks in the car, and although she is usually always excited to tell me all about her trips, she barely said a word about Japan during our drive. We were both silent the whole way there. The anxiety and stress that were permeating the entire city were also there in the car with us. I dropped my daughter off at her place, and then had to stop for gas on the way back to my apartment. I didn't get home until 1 a.m. As soon as I returned home, I turned on the computer and immediately saw the news. The quarantine would be imminently going into effect. Although a few people had suggested shutting down the city, I remember thinking, how are you supposed to lock down a city as big as Wuhan? So when the order came down, I really didn't expect it. The quarantine order also made me realize that this infectious disease that had been spreading must have already gotten to an extremely serious point. The next day, I went out to buy some face masks and groceries. The streets were very quiet. I don't think I'd ever seen the streets of Wuhan so wide open and deserted. Seeing those desolate streets made me very sad. My heart felt as empty as those abandoned avenues. That was a feeling I had never before experienced in my life. That feeling of uncertainty about the fate of my city. That uncertainty about whether my family members and I had been infected, and all the uncertainties about the future. All that left me with a strange feeling of confusion and anxiety. I went out again for the next 2 days in search of face masks, but the only people I encountered out on those empty streets were a few solitary street sweepers. Since there were so few pedestrians out, the streets were not even very dirty, but they kept frantically sweeping. For some reason, that scene gave me a strange sense of consolation and really set my heart at ease. On my way home, I kept wondering, since I had first heard about this virus back on December 31st, how come everyone had such a lax attitude about it for the following 20 days? We should have already learned our lesson from the SARS outbreak back in 2003. This why is also a question that a lot of people had been asking them.